Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. I'm Armen Georgian. The world faces unprecedented flows of migrants. 1 out of every 113 people on Earth is an asylum seeker, internally displaced person, or a refugee. That's according to the United Nations. Increasingly, European governments are interested in using their development aid budgets as a tool to stem migration. They say they want to work with developing countries to make sure that those populations have a future within those countries. But what are the ulterior motives? And is there any evidence that more development aid actually reduces migration? We're discussing these issues with my panel of guests. Let me introduce, first of all, Natalia Alonso, a Deputy Director of Advocacy and Campaigns for Oxfam International. Welcome to you. I also have to my right Charles Guérard, an MEP from Luxembourg. Hello.
Hello.
And you are the spokesperson for your party group, the Liberals and Democrats on development issues. To my left, two other MEPs also on the Parliament's Development Committee, Enrique Guerrero Salom from Spain, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And Linda McAvan, hello, you are the chairperson of that EU committee. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start with this idea of conditioning migrant flows to development aid. Is this something that you sense is the way the EU is really heading, and is this something desirable? Let me start with you, Charles.
Well, it's only, if it's only a conditionality, it's the beginning of the end of development cooperation. Humanitarian assistance is a response to a catastrophe. Development policy is an answer to the needs in the longer term. And if you establish a conditionality between the return of refugees and development assistance, that's, let me say it again, it's the beginning of the end of development policy of the European Union.
There's a lot of pressure at the moment from member states on the European Commission to go in that direction, isn't there?
Yes, I was going to say some governments would like there to be this kind of conditionality of aid, but we've had discussions in our committee, and I don't think that will get support from colleagues in the European Parliament. The aim of EU development funding under the treaties is to reduce poverty. It's true that if people leave because they have reason to leave, they leave Libya because it's conflict, and they're leaving Syria because of conflict. But other parts of the world, they're leaving because of poverty, and we have to put our focus on that poverty.
Natalia Alonso, you know the Afghan case very well. Just tell us a little bit about what happened to that recent deal between the EU and Afghanistan, which really brought these two things together, migrants and development aid, or asylum seekers and development aid, I should say.
Well, that's the main question that we have, in the sense of why these agreements, which is fairly enough to be held between the government of Afghanistan and the European Union in terms of getting agreement for returnees, how this was linked or at least coincided with the donor conference and with a lot of pledging coming from the European Union and the member states. And that's the question that we have, how it's possible that this was linked somehow.
But can that ever be an altruistic move just to reduce poverty? There's always going to be some kind of ulterior motive, at least in the minds of EU national policymakers, isn't there?
Yeah, of course. We know that there are many actors, including member states, of course, governments, that wants to conditionate development aid to political purposes, geostrategical relations, and so on. But the position of our committee in the European Parliament, and I guess that this is 100% position, and depending on the political groups, is that humanitarian action has principles that we have to preserve. And development has objectives in which we can, of course, provide resilience to the societies, but not to use these funds for the proposals that are linked with political objectives or geopolitical.
And presumably the bottom line here is that, well, this idea of a quid pro quo, in other words, you say, European government says to Afghanistan, you keep your asylum seekers, we'll give you development aid. In the background is far-right or populist forces are going to get stronger in Europe? Is that really what's going on behind the scenes here that's never stated openly in this
I
new
think
equation?
it's a bit more complicated than that in Afghanistan, because the reality in Afghanistan is that the majority of people going back to Afghanistan are not going back from Europe. They're going from the neighborhood. We talked earlier about how the majority of refugees are in poor countries. So they're in the neighboring countries. Many of them are going back over the border into Afghanistan from Pakistan, some being sent there. So there is a need to do something for those people there. That's not to do with the EU policy. It's just a fact on the ground.
Natalia, just one point about the ultimate goal of development aid. We've been talking here about poverty reduction. It should be about that rather than have ulterior political motives. But in fact, poverty reduction leads to more migration, according to various studies. So...
Yes, that's right. I think development is positively correlated to migration. So that means that if there is more development, people actually look for better opportunities, have the resources for that mobility, and eventually would move, for example, from the village to the city or from the city to another place. The question here is that development aid should be looking at people who flee, who are forced to flee. That means development aid needs to look at the root causes of forced displacement, which are conflict, which are war, which are also climate change, inequality, etc. This is where development aid should be really focusing. The reality is that if managed well, migration and development go hand in hand positively.
I'd like us just to take a step back and look at one of our own reports about the humanitarian situation in Lake Chad. Of course, a lot of people displaced there by Boko Haram, and this is an area where the European Union is very closely involved at the moment. Let's take a look at this report by our own Julie Dungelhoff.
Hundreds of islands spread over 4 countries: Cameroon, Nigeria, Niger and Chad. The fishermen from these villages have been under threat from Boko Haram for the past 3 years. Tens of thousands here in Chad have fled looting, pillaging, rape and death. Several hundred have been refugees in Bole for more than a year.
Boko Haram came to the village one Wednesday at about 2 in the morning. The day when they attacked, I was sick in bed, and a neighbour helped me to escape. We went to the lake and found a canoe which we used to cross. After that, we took a camel. We arrived in Medi, a village that's about 17 kilometres from here. I've been here for over a year, and I can't work.
A similar story can be heard throughout the camp. One night the Islamist group strikes, and the next day the village no longer exists.
We didn't expect Boko Haram to come to our village one day. People said they were going to come, but we didn't believe them. However, one night they came, shot at us and destroyed everything, so we left. Since then, we've been helping out in the region. We plough the fields of the locals and receive some money, which lets us buy food.
Many families now say they don't want to return home. The EU has announced it will donate almost 60 million euros to help those living nearby Lake Chad.
The education and, of course, the extreme poverty. Both of them, unfortunately, they are a fertile ground to radicalization. And as international community, and of course as European Union, we have to deal with these major issues in order to reduce the role and the influence of the Boko Haram in this area.
According to the UN, around 3 million people have been forced to flee their villages in the Lake Chad basin. A further 9 million urgently require humanitarian aid.
Well, obviously now we've moved to a slightly different area now, humanitarian aid, still related to development aid. But when you see this report, do you find yourselves again saying, couldn't we have seen this coming? Are we still in a, crisis response rather than prevention mode, Charles Gans?
Well, it's obvious that this catastrophe is not originated by yesterday or the day before. But it's well known that Chad is part of a region with huge problems, a very huge birth rate, poverty, terrorism, and so on. And you have to activate several building sites You have to improve governance. You have to improve the intelligence service in order to see who is threatening the security of people inside the country. You have to fight against land grabbing, and so on. You have so many problems which are far beyond the means and the capacity of our partner countries, Chad, for instance. That's the reason why development policy is so important and indispensable for this country, as well as for the countries of the whole region, except perhaps Nigeria, where you have still a very huge poverty rate.
But are you saying that if EU development policy had somehow been more precise or more effective, shall we say, in the Lake Chad region, then this particular humanitarian response would also be more effective?
You can only evaluate the progress made by development policy in the very long term. You have to be patient but determined to launch real partnerships with the country. That's the A and O of development policy. Development policy is much more criticized during a stress period. But if there is no stress, no threat from terrorism, then nobody is interested in following what is happening there.
And look how long it took us in Europe.
Many times it depends on the media, on what appears.
Yeah.
Or the public
That's
opinion. It's a reaction to a disaster.
What do you mean, and how long it took us?
Well, I
in Europe?
mean, you know, we're sitting here in a continent where we spent most of our history fighting each other in terrible wars. And it took, I say that as a British person, very sad about the idea of leaving the European Union. But it took us a long time to get to where we are living peacefully together. So we are not well placed to give lessons to others. But things are changing. If you look at what happened in Ethiopia at the moment, for example, with the El Nino, action was taken beforehand. When I was a little girl, it was always pictures of Ethiopia, the starving children, because of previous droughts. This time, action was taken. Governance has been improved in that country, and therefore it was possible to prevent a humanitarian disaster.
Two other areas, if we have time to go through to both of them, where EU humanitarian aid is very much in the spotlight. Haiti as a result of Hurricane Matthew, and of course Syria, that's very much ongoing. Do you think it's sort of fair when you hear these criticisms of, the EU being basically powerless? I mean, the EU is dealing with a government which either doesn't allow the aid convoys to come in, or if they do go in, they're sometimes bombed and people are killed. It sounds like a really impossible situation. Has any of you got any reactions to
that I am the standing rapporteur for humanitarian action in the European Parliament. We have a clear vision of the humanitarian action in terms of independence, neutrality, not interference in political conflicts, trying to attack the needs of the real people. And for instance, in the discussion of Syria, of course, that we are asking for humanitarian access to the people in Aleppo or in other parts in Syria for the evacuation, for sanitary reasons. And at that moment, we don't care very much about the government because we are looking only the people and the needs of the people in humanitarian needs of assistance.
In addition to that, one must say that the European policy, be it defense policy or the external policy in general terms speaking, has to be in line with the principles as laid down in the UN Charter. That reduces the panoply of possibilities to intervene. We cannot do in Syria what Russia is doing nowadays. That means that either we are in line with those principles or we are opposite to it. We are, I think we, around this table, are rather in favor of maintaining this system.
Just on a final point, because we mentioned this before, the idea of impartiality in conflicts. What does that mean for Oxfam in this case of Syria, for example?
Well, the case is like, as a humanitarian actor, our only aim is basically to help the people and who are in need, and we try to get their help as soon as possible and in the better way, regardless of the political considerations.
But if you allow me, there is something that we have to improve, because European Union as a global actor should be an actor trying to build peace, avoid conflicts, and provide opportunities for humanitarian and development action. So there is a role to play of the European Union, not only as a global actor on humanitarian aid or development, but also avoiding conflicts, being part of stability in the region, negotiating. For instance, the European Union can be an important actor discussing with the Syrian government or with United States and Russia in order to provide humanitarian corridors to...
Right, so like a more muscular
Unfortunately, the prevented
role.
conflict has no visibility.
The EU doesn't have visibility, you mean, on that conflict?
The EU has the capacity to prevent conflicts, but unfortunately, the prevented conflict has no visibility. That's a real disaster.
Okay, well, you agree on that point. Let's stop there because we need to move on now in a few moments to the second half of Talking Europe. Eve Irvine will be here in just a few minutes. Don't go away.